And we yesterday enjoyed readings from Andrew Hudgins and from Erin McGraw, and a wonderful performance by Over the Rhine. And this afternoon and tonight looks to continue that. It'd be remiss of me not to give a word of thanks to Dan Sundahl, who founded this program 25 years ago, and has been was a wonderful initiator, and who has handed it over to John Somerville, who's been a great steward. In fact, Dan shouted out from the audience yesterday that when John said he's been running the program, Dan said perfected the program. And so those are high words of praise. Today we're going to have a discussion about faith and the arts. Before us we have all 6 participants in this 2-day celebration. I'd like to introduce you to them one by one. To my left, beginning on the far left, is Suzanne Wolfe. She received her BA and MA degrees from Oxford University. Her first novel, Unveiling, was published by Bergquist Press, and she's the co-author with her husband Greg of several books. Books that build character, Climb High, Climb Far, The Family New Media Guide, Bless This House, Prayers for Families and Children, and Circle of Grace, Praying with and for your children. She teaches English at Seattle Pacific University and is the executive editor at Image. And if that wasn't enough, she also blogs at Pathos. To her right is Greg Wolfe. He's the founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Image Journal, and the director of the Center for Religious Humanism. And in addition to that, he's the director of the MFA in Creative Writing program at Seattle Pacific University. He served as a judge in nonfiction for the 2005 National Book Awards. Among his books are Malcolm Muggeridge, a biography, a collection of his editorial statements from Image entitled Intruding Upon the Timeless, Meditations on Art, Faith, and Mystery, and a collection of essays entitled Beauty Will Save the World. He has co-edited God With Us, Rediscovering the Meaning of Christmas, which I hear has gone out of print and now is back in print. And
the companion volume, God For Us, for Lent and Easter, went out of print at the beginning of Lent last year. That's the one that's now back in print.
Okay, thank you. So, those two. He's also the editor of the New Religious Humanist, a reader. He's published essays, reviews, and articles in numerous journals such as Commonweal, First Things, National Review, Crisis, Modern Age, and New Oxford Review. He received his BA, summa cum laude, from Hillsdale College, and his MA in English Literature from Oxford. He's currently working on a book entitled Christian Humanism, A Faith for All Seasons. Andrew Hudgins is the author of several collections of poetry, including A Clown at Midnight, American Rendering, New and Selected Poems, Ecstatic in the Poison, Babylon in a Jar, Saints and Strangers, After the Lost War, a Narrative, and The Never Ending. He is a very perceptive literary critic. I find him to be the best reader of Jory Graham since Helen Vindler. And for every poetry journal that you can imagine, he's been published within its pages. He's written a memoir entitled The Joker, and he's also published short stories. He is a recipient of the Writer Benner Award of the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters, and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize with Saints and Strangers, and a finalist for the National Book Award for After the Lost War. He was a recipient of the Poets Prize for After the Lost War. And I skipped Erin McGraw.
You did.
My apologies. Erin McGraw received her MFA at Indiana University and has lived in the Midwest ever since. She teaches at the Ohio State University and divides her time between Ohio and Tennessee. Her newest novel, Better Food for a Better World, was published last spring by Slant Books, a new imprint that Greg Wolfe edits. She is also the author of the novels The Seamstress of Hollywood Boulevard and The Baby Tree, as well as the short story collections The Good Life, Lives of the Saints, and Bodies at Sea. We all had the privilege of listening to Over the Rhine last night. Native Ohioans Linford, Detweiler, and Karin Bergquist launched the group as a quartet in the spring of 1989, naming the ensemble after the historic Bohemian Cincinnati neighborhood Over the Rhine, where they lived and first wrote and recorded together. Their early demos and performances quickly struck a chord with listeners, and they already had a solid local following by the time they launched their recording career with a pair of well-received, independently released albums, Till We Have Faces and Patience. Over the next 2 decades, Over the Rhine continued to build a musically and emotionally potent catalog, encompassing the studio albums Eve, Good Dog, Bad Dog, Films for Radio, Ohio, Drunkard's Prayer, The Trumpet Child, The Long Surrender, and Meet Me at the Edge of the World. They have also recorded holiday-themed records, The Darkest Night of the Year, and Snow Angels. The Live Changes Come, and a series of limited edition CDs that feature live, rare, and unreleased recordings. A new album, Blood Oranges in the Snow, will be released in 2 weeks on November 4th. Please join me in welcoming all the panelists. We have 3 married couples before us this afternoon. And so the first question I'd like to pose to you all is this: how important are stable relationships to creativity, writing, and performing?
Uh-oh.
Well, first of all, stable. I mean,
We're all looking at each
Well, I'll
other.
say curiously that I did notice that a lot of my favorite songwriters in recent years were in long-term monogamous relationships. I would begin with Tom Waits, one of my all-time favorites. His wife is his primary collaborator, editor, and stage designer. Gillian Welsh and David Rawlings aren't officially married, I don't think, but they've been together probably at least 15 years or more, writing and touring together.
Depends on the law in whatever state they're.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
True.
That's right. That's right.
Who else? Buddy and Julie Miller,
Joe Henry,
Joe Henry.
they've been hitched for some time, right?
Pardon me?
They've been hitched a long time.
Joe and Mel.
Yeah, Joe and Mel.
And
Our
we were
producer, yeah, beautiful couple.
And Jay and Jen.
Yeah, and we had the privilege of going out with a bass player and a drummer, probably the most sought-after drummer in the U.S. right now, Jay Belrose. And they've been in a relationship for well over a decade. And some of the people that you would think, you know, have gone down a different path. One might think of Leonard Cohen. And I remember something that he said along the lines of, you know, I've been privileged to be called a singer. I could barely carry a tune. I've been lucky enough to be called a poet. You know, maybe I did write a few things, and I was also called a ladies' man, which was a joke. And all I can do is think of all the nights I cried bitterly alone. So maybe there's something to be said for having a trusted editor somewhat nearby and a little bit of stability. Who knows?
I think it's also because we share a common passion. I mean, obviously for each other, but for something outside of us, something, you know, language, music, something that draws us both in the same direction.
I like that.
Well, people have asked us many times, all those collaborations on those books you wrote together, that must have been, and really, I mean, with the exception of a few moments here and there, I've always told people, when it comes to the writing we've done together, it's the good of the object made that we care about.
Yeah.
And it's the rest of our married life that's screwed up, you know?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it's not the writing, and it's not even the kids, too, because that's the good of the thing, the thing made, too. It's like how many shoes I bought last week. Whatever. Right? Yeah. Or, the fact that when he gets grumpy about that, and I remember that only the previous week he dropped like $5,000 on some piece of electronics.
No.
2,000. 2,000. See?
Some number.
Yeah.
I mean, some things are harder to take than others. Some things sink in slowly. But, right?
Are you still talking shoes?
Editorial critique, creative differences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you probably, Greg and I are very different. I mean, we collaborate, but we're totally different with the way we approach writing, for example. What was it you were explaining the other day to one of the kids on the phone? You said something like, Greg is like, you have to kind of get everything, kind of all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted.
I outline,
He outlines.
basically.
Obsessively, okay?
Hey, it's what they taught me at Hillsdale. Outline your papers.
And I just like jump in. I literally jump in with a sentence, like a first sentence. I mean, and then see how that grows organically. I don't know how about you guys?
We are each other's first readers, and over the years, a informal rule has come up in the house that nothing leaves the house without the other one signing off on it, because Andrew has saved me from too much embarrassment.
And verse of us.
But the way I hear that question that Dutton posed I just think that stability for an artist is a smart thing in general. And Flaubert says somewhere that it's good to live like a bourgeois so that you can write like, and the translations vary. Sometimes it says a madman, but the translation I like better says you can write like an archangel. And, in his case, that meant living in his mom's house and letting her cook him food while he wrote these tormented letters to his mistress in Paris. But it worked. I do think that it's very useful to get as much noise out of my head as possible and to live in a quiet and contained way. And for sure, a stable relationship is the major part of that. Absolutely. And I think that it does then open up other energies to create.
Well, it's important to us because it's important to us. We come to that and we want that stability, and all of us, obviously, and therefore we're in these marriages that are long-term marriages. But I certainly know, as Linford suggested, people who thrive on chaos, who go out and screw around or whatever they do to get turmoil in their lives, and then they retreat into their work as some way. It's not a way that I want to live. It's that form of chaos and madness. But I've certainly seen people do that, and I imagine you have too. For me, it's a different thing. When I sit down with the writing and I try to write every day. Job stops me from doing that a lot of the time, but I've always tried to do that. When I was married to my first wife, I did it. When I was not married to my first wife, I did it. When I was married to Erin, I continue to do it. The difference is that was poetry mostly, some prose, but in this marriage, I've been able to let Erin help me write prose in ways that I was nervous about, unwilling really throw myself over into a new discipline. And she certainly helped me with that. Could I have done it otherwise? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It's not a life I have to live. And but yeah, for me personally, for us personally, and I imagine since we're all here, yeah, stability is a lovely, wonderful, and helpful thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I would just add to that for me, our relationship has been very encouraging both ways, and we've also had to learn how to be soft editors with one another, because we are in such close contact with what we do. It's constant. It's not like I have this and he has this. We have this thing together. So it's a little more intense, and we've had to, I think, learn, and probably will continue to learn how to be gentle with that, but still objective. And for me personally, I didn't really realize how much routine I needed, and so I got 3 dogs. And there's a chaos in it a little bit at this point in my life. However, they have provided stability through routine for me, which is something I didn't know I needed until I had it. And I had no structure to my day, and I think artists struggle with that, or writers, or whatever. And so, yes, I say thumbs up to the stability, and my energy goes into positive things rather than chaos.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to point out that all the women on the panel, on this particular panel, I love to hear all of them laugh. Very good laughers. So I'm not sure if that's important or not.
It's totally important.
I think it is.
Suzanne had me worried at the beginning there when I chose stable over long term, but now I'm glad I did. Well, this is the question that I have to ask. It's 1989. Image and Over the Rhine have just formed. Image's first issue is published, and the album Till We Have Faces comes out in 1991. Andrew's follow-up to the Pulitzer Prize nominated Saints and Sinners, After the Lost War, has been published in 1988. Erin has published a short story in the 5th issue of Image in 1990. What are the main differences between the audiences you had in the early 90s and the audiences you have now? What are the main cultural differences between 1989 and 2014?
Way better clothes now.
Way better clothes. And hair.
And hair.
That's true. For a very brief time, we were an 80s band.
Big hair and mullets.
Padded shoulders.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, isn't that into you probably? That's a pitch right down the middle for you.
Come on, Wolfe.
Well, I know. I mean, it's I've really got a spiel on it, and but it certainly doesn't cover all of our different various experiences. So I hope everyone will chime in. Well, when we started Image, of course, we were pretty skeptical about what the reception would be. I mean, one of the reasons we started Image was that a very strange thing seemed to be true. Millions of religious folk and almost all the cultural gatekeepers of the secular world seem to agree on something, which theoretically they shouldn't. But they seem to agree that contemporary art and literature that seriously engage the ancient Western faith traditions was not possible anymore. And that odd agreement, the very fact that 2 completely disparate communities would agree on the same thing, kind of pissed us off in a way. I mean, I think anger is an underrated source of human motivation. Or let's say righteous wrath. I don't care. Dudgeon. You know, high dudgeon, I'd go for medium dudgeon, you know. And we believed that couldn't be true. You know, that, as I was saying to somebody last night, it says, or yesterday, it's as if people, at least the religious folks, thought that the Holy Spirit was locked up in a cage in some dungeon somewhere, that this couldn't happen, that Western Civ had died at some point. And so what we were kind of nervous about was, you know, who would be the most hostile to what we were trying to do. Was the religious audience going to vilify us for, you know, trying to share this material that didn't explicitly pontificate, that didn't have mission statements or characters who stood up and were the vehicles of truth in a narrative, for example? Were the secular critics going to dismiss us? I mean, the secular argument was classic. It was kind of third-rate Freudianism because, as we remember, you know, Freud, and this is really his weakest side, I don't mean to diss him completely, but he wasn't really great on religion, and he said it was wish fulfillment and escapism. And so the old argument was that if real art is about money, sex, and power, kind of the ultimate reality of human life, and religion was escapism, then how could they ever mix? There was no way they could ever mix. Because religion just goes, whoo, and it makes you, it just takes you away from the struggle that needs to take place within your characters, within your imagery, and so on. Well, what we had begun to notice, at least by 1989, was that whereas, say, in the 70s, 60s, or 70s, the New York Times Book Review would have a book review that would say, I remember one in particular of a novel by Larry Woywoody, not necessarily one of his best, but it was not a bad novel called Papa John. And it is a story that actually has a conversion, a Christian conversion story in it. And it's very gritty. It's about an alcoholic actor who's very down and out and who sort of gets more and more degraded. And he has this bottoming out experience. Anyway, when Joyce Carol Oates, you know, reviewed that book, it was with utmost scorn. You know, this book started so well, and then, woo, religion came in and blah, blah, blah. What we were beginning to notice, even from 1989, was that the book reviews in those kind of venues were beginning to say things like, maybe of a review of a Reynolds Price novel or something like that. How interesting that the faith, however tinged by doubt or tentative, of this protagonist urges that person to a deeper engagement with the world, forces them, in a sense, to have to grapple with the world that they might otherwise wish to escape. Whoa, there was, you know, a change happening. And I think that change really began, you know, continued from that time onwards, so that at least now there's a greater porousness in the mainstream cultural organs. I mean, look at the way Marilyn Robinson's Lila is being reviewed right now. And not just in National Review or National Catholic Reporter or Christianity Today, but the New Yorker and the Atlantic and so on. People have, maybe it's sometimes grudging respect, but if the work is there, and this was always our trust, if the work was there, which is why we had to pick excellent work, then we hoped and prayed that it would gain that hearing. And we feel that that's been the experience for Image. And the change in the religious community has been huge. I mean, there are now churches, for example, non-denominational churches that have like permanent gallery space in their church sanctuary to have art shows up all the time. It's like an amazing change has gone on. People got sick of polemics and apologetics and realized that we needed the imagination to address the mystery of the spiritual life.
Well, I've certainly noticed at Ohio State, when I was teaching at Cincinnati, I was there for 16 years, that overlapped a little bit with the time we're talking about. Actually, we left about in 2001. The students there, very few were writing in any kind of religious tradition. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
And now at Ohio State, more of our students are interested in it. For a while, it was a little bit because I was there, Erin was there, and our colleague David Satino was there. And we would get students that they were kind of keeping quiet about it, but then they would come and talk to us. More would kind of come in and let their hair down with you, wouldn't they?
Well, when we were still at Cincinnati, Greg's heard this story before. This would have been mid-90s. A student came into my office, closed the door behind her, looked at me with this hunted look on her face and said, "I want to write about religion." And that, I don't think that she would feel so hunted now. I think that she'd be a lot more comfortable with that. She would find a lot more space. And she'd find respect from her peers that she certainly didn't find that.
And, when those students come, we put copies of Image in their hands.
We sure do.
It's interesting that we don't have as much as we used to, and Greg would understand too, that when we get applications from students from Bible colleges, they are smart and they are incredibly untrained as artists. And it just breaks your heart, because you do think that if these were people that went and got training as artists, they could be a voice that would work within the tradition as artists, but because they have no instruction, we can't take them. We've got too many good people that are already working at a high level. And what I do with my own students, and actually sometimes when I go off to smaller colleges, I'll say, look, if you want me to meet with your religious colleges, I'll meet with your students and I can try to walk them through some of the basics, but in truth it's going to be too little most of the time. So what I'm trying to do is give them some pointers and then point them to the Glenn conferences or to places where they can do an MA in literature and take creative writing classes, and then they can be up to snuff to do an MFA at a program that they aim to. And again, your MFA programs are working, they're doing that work in the fields too. But I find the students more open to it. The ones that are open to it are open to it. The ones that are uninterested in it are deeply and profoundly uninterested, but they are not as antagonistic as they used to be.
An exception just floated through.
But Greg had mentioned that we were afraid of the hostile. We were wondering from what direction the hostility would come when we first published the pilot issue of Image in '89. And we soon learned, because we were at a Catholic college and I was immediately fired. Yeah, and then Greg resigned, and it was because of Image, and they had taken exception to the art that we had put in there. And I was Dean of Women. I wasn't fired as a teacher of lit, I was fired as Dean of Women, because I was deemed not, therefore, morally appropriate to oversee the lives of young women.
Which was true, of course.
Which is true, my daughters.
Well, we had a long essay on John Updike, the use of sex in John Updike's fiction. We had a front cover that had a beautiful, I thought, still do, beautiful modern triptych. It was very subtly a triptych. It showed this big panel with, it was like what they call trompe-l'oeil effects, so where they had masking taped 3 images, and the image, central image was of a kind of screaming man, which is clearly a man in agony, and one was of a ladder, makes you think of the deposition of Christ coming down from the cross. And then on the right was this beautiful 9 months pregnant nude woman seen from the side, with the tiniest bit of pubic hair visible, okay? I mean, this was not prurient, it was like reverent.
Yeah.
I mean, this was an adoration. This was the mother of God, in a sense, metaphorically. But at a Catholic college, you mess around with the Virgin Mary and you show her nude, goodbye.
It's over.
So, yeah, we did pay a price there, for sure, but Luckily, it got better from that point onward.
Though not immediately.
Not immediately.
I mean, we had, I don't know that I can add a whole lot, but I mean, musically, in 1989, Karin and I grew up in the church, around a lot of gospel music. My father was a minister, so there was this question, should we try to be on a Christian label, or should we, just forge our own path, or try to be on a major label, or what? And we made the decision that we wanted to take our music to the general marketplace, wherever people at large were finding music in a record store or going into a particular venue in their town to hear interesting songwriters. We wanted to just show up on the scene with our work in kind of a neutral setting. We didn't want to go around to church youth groups and play music, So that was a decision, but there was all sorts of subtle gospel music influences in our music, so we did get occasional invitations from Christian festivals or Christian colleges to come perform, and there were some interesting moments. First of all, Cornerstone Festival in Illinois was sort of a music and arts festival that's no longer in existence. Greenbelt Festival in England, Flavo Festival in Holland, they all invited us to come and play. And for the most part, it embraced us, but we were this odd duck that went out and we would play in clubs all year long, and then we'd play one or two Christian festivals, and that was very odd in the early 90s. And now I think it's not even, wouldn't even cross a young kid that had grown up in the church. It wouldn't even be an issue across their mind at all that they, of course they should take their music just and play it in the club, whatever that was downtown, and just get it out there. So, and there were a few interesting, Christian colleges that would invite us to come play, and then somebody would open a record and see a picture of a sculpture at the Musée d'Orsay of a nude.
Just legs.
And
Just legs.
This panic would begin
Just
to,
legs.
To go across campus that, oh my goodness, what are we getting ourselves into? And there were some interesting stories where,
We were asked not to come.
yeah, shows were canceled and things like that. So we tried to be very open on the front end about, now, are you sure you know what you're signing up for?
Are you okay with the art in the Musée d'Orsay?
Yeah. But thankfully, I really don't think, for the most part, that people would be wasting their time on those sort of peripheral conversations at this point. I think mostly the conversation would be, is this good, interesting music that we should bring to our campus? And I think there's been some steps forward.
Our audience is definitely older now as well. That's one big difference. And we also have younger generations coming in, but it's far more diverse, I think, now than it used to be. And so that's a really interesting thing to sort of nurture. I think we have learned the importance of gratitude over the 25-year span. I think when you're young and you're kind of an upstart, you get in there and you just you go full steam, at least in our genre. But the one thing that we've learned over those 25 years is gratitude, and not to coddle or cater to an audience, but you learn how to nurture the audience. And I think that maybe has affected our relationship with them over the years as well.
Yeah, we love our diverse audiences, and as far as it growing somewhat older, thank God, because they have more money.
Well, not when they're paying the sitter, they don't.
This question is a follow-up to the last one. We're all well aware of how the publishing industry has changed because of the internet. With the exception of Andrew, who's had 7 out of his 9 books published with the same press, the majority of you have gone with several different publishers. In fact, at this point, Over the Rhine began with IRS Records, but now has its own record label, Great Spec Dog. And Greg is the editor for Slant Books. How has the infrastructure for developing new talent changed? And what's available for emerging artists today?
Again, Greg, I was right down your alley.
Well, yeah, I mean, nobody knows how all this is going to shake out. That's the problem. I mean, there are beautiful things about what technology is making possible. For one thing, it's decentralizing the production process, which means that the big conglomerates are no longer the narrow bottleneck through which everything has to pass. And ultimately, that's a healthy thing. I mean, yes, they were gatekeepers and arbiters of taste, and I'm a strong believer that that is an important. We need curators of culture. We need people whose judgment we can trust. But it was like when we only had 3 channels. I mean, now we got 1 million, and we're complaining about that. But the truth is that you can even make a film these days. You know, that's how radical it is. You can make a film these days with something you can hold in your hand and put it up on the big screen, and that means that there's not so much a barrier to entry. The concomitant problem is that anybody can put anything out there, and that problem of curation remains, as well as of sales and as well as of cohesiveness of the market. And I know that, you know, each of us has struggled. We want our work to appear under some authority greater than ourselves. You know, so I caution anyone before self-publishing. I know it's so tempting just to push a button and have Amazon deliver your book to you, but, you know, reputations and careers do require some nurturing and some thought. And, you know, in the era of instant gratification, hold back your first impulse on that score. But on the other hand, nobody knows how to make any money. And so we're all trying to find out how to, you know, get honest pay for honest work. And that really hasn't shaken out fully at this point. But the need for curators is still there. And I think that's where people are beginning to look for the small indie press, the Grey Wolves, the Sarabands, whatever. They're, I think, now looming larger than they ever had in the past, because they know that many of the books they're publishing are not going to be the mega sellers by TV celebrities and movie stars and sports stars, but they're the ones that are going to take care, God willing, of the better work. And no one's going to make a lot of money, so yeah, consider a day job, people.
Well, and the Grey Wolves and the Sarabands don't have unrealistic expectations foisted on them by corporate overlord, the corporations that have bought them out. Well, it used to be, and now I'm going a good little ways back, say 40 years ago, it was expected that a book would make back maybe 2 or 3% for the company that published it. Small little margins. And companies were based on that expectation, and contracts were issued on that expectation. That has changed. And now we've got publishing houses that are owned by multinational conglomerates who have an expectation that every book is going to bring back a return of anywhere between 10 to 25%. That's ludicrous. That's just so not possible.
Ludicrous for literary publishing.
Ludicrous for literary publishing, and frankly, it's ludicrous for a lot of commercial publishing too, but it explains why commercial writers are writing so much more now. And when you've got Grey Wolf, when you've got Saraband, when you've got Slant, when you've got Algonquin, when you've got these places that have a more realistic expectation of what their books are going to bring back, and their projections are based on that, you've got companies that are able to function at a sane level. And it's just, you can tell the difference when you go to these editorial offices. If you go over to New York, people are losing their minds. They're frightened, and jobs are on the line all the time. You go to Sarah Band, people are having coffee.
Yeah. Well, what's that publishing house that just recently went non-profit?
McSweeney's.
McSweeney's.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you would have thought, well, they're super hip. They know how to make money. No, not really. They're putting out some pretty finely crafted stuff. It's not just it's not sugar. It's not sugar babies that you just nom and dispose of. Takes time to work your way into one of their special issues, and you got to sit with it. So they've made the shift.
Well, in the poetry world, the people who've worked with commercial houses has shrunk. Farrow, Straus and Giroux still does a poetry line. Houghton Harcourt does, but a lot of the people that used to do these don't anymore. There's no money in it. It's all exactly what Erin said. Then we started moving to the university presses. Now the university presses are cutting back on it for the same financial reasons. And when students come to me, I don't really quite know what to tell them, what will get them an academic job. The number of people pursuing the slots, the diminishing number of slots, is gotten larger. The number of jobs out in the world has gotten smaller. I think we try to be upfront about that, and people are doing this because they want to be artists. The independent houses are coming in, smaller presses are coming up, something like Able Muse, which I'm sure you've not heard of. Small press with an emphasis on formal poetry that's doing extremely good work. And so I think that's one of the places my students and my colleagues who've had experiences with larger presses that now are no longer doing poetry, that is a place, in places like that they are going. How the internet works into this and how internet publishing works, I don't know. I mean, all of academe is trying to figure that out, because it's a matter of curating. How does it work where you take it to an outside review committee, and that outside review is rigorous and thorough, and your book comes out with Harvard UP, but is there a Harvard UP online? No. So when Stephen Greenblatt was head of the MLA, and he came out and he said that we should accept online publishing fully as the equivalent of publishing with Oxford University Press, Harvard University Press. You look at it and you go, okay, Harvard, you start. They're not going to do that. They're not going to do it. So he's trying to establish a certain standard for everyone else that he doesn't want to hold his people to. So I honestly don't know what to tell my students, though. I have a woman, Ashley McHugh, who has an undergraduate from Ohio State, an MA from Boston University, an MFA from the University of Arkansas, and an award-winning book that won that New Criterion Prize. She is now happily working as a manager in a company, and pleased to have a 40-hour-a-week job and a better paycheck than she was getting as a teacher in a branch of the University of Arkansas. And I think we're going to have more of that. There's nowhere else to go. That's the happy news. The good news is people are continuing to follow an artistic passion.
Probably some overlap in the music world, of course. When we first started out in the early 90s, it was all about trying to get the major label record deal, and we worked really hard to do that, and got on a quote-unquote major label, and it was cause for great celebration. And 2 or 3 records in, we realized that there was no way we were ever going to sustain a career in music if we kept giving away our records and our songs to a major record label, lock, stock, and barrel, for very little in return, really, at the end of the day. It's a little bit like going to a bank and saying, I would like to buy a house, or maybe even build a house, and the bank giving you the money, and then you pay all the money back at very steep return, at a very steep rate of return or whatever, and then the bank owns your house forever once you finally pay them back. That was the major label model. So you end up owning nothing, but they give you the little bit of money up front to help grease the wheels or whatever. So in '96 we said, screw it, let's just start putting out our own records and owning our own music. We'll just see what happens. And
Well, there was a transition before that, though, where we actually had encountered a lawyer that was very smart and was married to another musical performer in her family and negotiated for us. First, he planted the seed that you can negotiate getting your records back after a decade. So there was a transition. He sort of planted a seed for us, and after a certain point, we started to get our material back.
yeah, we went 100% independent for a while. Then we tried a model with a label where our music reverted back to us at some point. So somehow we managed to end up owning most of our music from the last few decades, which has allowed us to continue to make music, but it's been a very, uncertain path forward, and now with downloading and everything, it's still, a bit nebulous. I can say that, what hasn't changed in the last 25 years is the work itself. The dilemma of the blank page and trying to create something that, feels somehow connected to the writer and, feels like a well-made thing. That whole, that part never goes away, never changes, and that's what probably keeps us all coming back. I think somehow, there's a little bit of a leap of faith. You believe that if you continue to do your best work, that hopefully people will continue to find it and appreciate it, and somehow you can keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think just raise your standards with your work and lower your expectations with how it's received, because we don't get to sit on the committee that decides what happens after it's out there. So you have to check why you're doing it, what's your motivation, and if it's to create something important that matters and translates to someone else and it's good work, then I think that's a really good reason to move forward. But the rest you have to let go of.
In the music world, Greg, at this point, I can remember that feeling of like, oh, should we put our music out ourselves? Isn't that, how's that going to work? We're not on Warner Brothers anymore or whatever. Well, it's all vanity publishing now. in the music world.
In the music world.
Because the major labels imploded
Right.
and crashed and burned. And so in the music, we just put it out ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's a different
Definitely.
criterion that people apply to music. I mean,
Okay.
Definitely.
first of all, many of the artists who've done that have already had a track record. But
Okay.
but ultimately, that's a place where music is a tad more of a popular medium than literature, and so I think there are ways that people look for the critics and the websites and Paste Magazine and so on. There are still curators out there. It's not so much the publisher doing it as it's the intermediate
Right.
realm. So I think that it's true. I knew you were going to say that. That is in fact the truth. It's a little trickier with writing, I think.
Definitely.
Still.
Time for one more question, or? speak? All right. So I guess it's just kind of a general question. Who are the singer-songwriters, poets, short story writers, novelists, visual artists, and essayists that we should be reading today? The people that you admire.
Looking at me again?
I can say.
Please, help save me.
Well, I worship Cormac McCarthy, so if you haven't read, now buckle up because Blood Meridian's a bit of a ride. But, there's far worse on TV, blood and gore. Oh yeah, major. And over to you whilst I think of more, because my mind just went blank. Tim Winton.
Well, Tim Winton, yeah. I mean, we should probably, I feel like mentioning people who might not be as well known because, these guys might like those kind of recommendations. So Tim Winton, an Australian novelist, Cloud Street, Dirt Music. His most recent book is called Eerie. Wonderful writer, just incredibly gifted writer. If you have a taste for dense poetry that's sort of densely allusive to history and other literature, I think Geoffrey Hill, the British poet, is he's one of those hard writers like Eliot who is hard, yes, but fulfills the requirement that any difficult writer has to have applied to him or her, which is, does it repay the effort? And Hill, I always feel repaid. I look up the allusions and I reread the poem, and I feel, a better, broader human being for it. So anyway, I know we're kind of tight on time, so.
Dutton sent these questions out to us. Come on, Suzanne. And I am particularly glad he did, because this is the kind of question that sends me straight into brain freeze. So I was able to come in prepared. 3 writers about place. One whose name we've been throwing around a lot the last couple of days, Morris Manning. He's a poet from Kentucky. Morris spelled like Maurice. And he's very, very interesting, very strange, very wide writer. You never quite know what you're going to get with Morris. A short story writer named Claire Vay Watkins, who writes about her home state of Nevada. She's got a book out called Battleborn, which is Nevada's state motto. And it's absolutely worth looking at. She's got a singular voice. And another short story writer and novelist named Holly Goddard Jones, who is creating her own fictional place called Roma, Kentucky, based on southwest Kentucky where she grew up. And she's not quite turning it into Yoknapatawpha County yet, but she's creating something very real and very beautiful. So those would be my 3.
I know you all know John Sullivan, who was here recently, and we're always pleased when we see John in the Sunday Times Magazine. A name that surprises me that I'm going to mention is Tom McGuane. I used to read the young McGuane and not see the point, but the McGuane that's publishing in the New Yorker, when those show up, I know I'm going to read that. He's really doing a terrific job. Morris again, and a couple of poets. Bridget Kelly. You've published Bridget?
I haven't. I've written her a letter. I didn't get a response.
She never responds. She lives in her own world, but she's a terrific writer, and so is Linda Gregerson, who teaches at University of Michigan. Those are just some names that, right off the top of my head.
Well, ours probably won't be that much of a surprise. We've been mentored by Joe Henry, who I think is an unsung writer. He is stupendous and cares about the craft, and he's had some great successes, popularity with a couple of songs. He likes to say that he writes songs, and in this one example, his sister-in-law Madonna wrote the hit, made it a hit. But it's quality material. Another that wouldn't be much of a surprise is the Milk Carton Kids, Kenneth Pattengale and Joey Ryan. We've worked with them. We actually just collaborated with them and Joe Henry on a separate project where the 5 of us got together for 3 days and wrote, I don't know how many songs, but they are young voices, great talent, very thoughtful, very smart, and they're doing something pretty fresh. And I have my go-tos that will always be there because their voices their singing voices and their writing voices meant so much to me, and one of which is Lucinda Williams. She knows what she's doing. I don't need to say anything else about her writing. That's probably enough.
That's great. I'll just add Loudon Wainwright.
Yeah.
If you don't know his writing, it's Rufus's dad.
Yeah.
Check out his records. He's a heavy hitter.
Well, thank you so much for participating in the discussion. And I'd like everyone to invite everybody to hear Greg Wolfe speak tonight at 8 o'clock. And there will be a reception afterward where there will be brownies and books to sign and great conversation. So I look forward to seeing you then. And please extend a note of thanks to everyone on the panel.